That morning, the light didn't come back, and I realized that the darkness surrounding my home was nothing compared to the darkness that had already begun to grow inside my own son. I remember exactly how it felt when I opened the back door and felt the cold air brush against my face. The sun was trying to rise, but it looked reluctant to brighten that backyard that, for so many years, had held our conversations, our secrets, and even the little boy's games of the one who used to call me Mom, with a sparkle in his eyes. And there, lying in the middle of the damp grass, was the flashlight, turned over, wet with dew, forgotten as if no memory were attached to it. A flashlight he insisted on buying years ago, saying he wanted to make sure the house never went dark. I stood there, looking at that object, and it wasn't the flashlight that weighed on me. It was what it meant. Because some abandonments are silent, and that's exactly why they hurt more. And there are signs God places in front of us, like mirrors, revealing truths we pretend not to see. That flashlight, fallen and lifeless, wasn't just a careless mistake. It represented the way my son had been dimming me, little by little. And in that moment, right there in the backyard, I felt something inside me split in two. The truth is, no one abandons a light by accident. When someone leaves a flashlight in the dark, it's because they no longer see value in what once guided them. And what hurt me wasn't the forgotten flashlight. It was realizing that, for a long time, I'd been left in that same place. Except, unlike the flashlight, I was still trying to function, still trying to illuminate paths he no longer cared to walk beside me. I walked back inside with a flashlight in my hands, feeling the cold blend with a memory I'd been trying to ignore for years. A mother always knows when her relationship with a child starts to come undone. First, it's a sharp word you pretend not to notice. Then, it's a visit. That ends too fast, a hug that ends too soon, an absence that lasts too long. And before you realize it, the house remains full of objects that hold stories, but empty of the presence that once gave meaning to everything. I held that flashlight like someone holding a confession, like someone holding a wound that had just opened. And in that moment, as I walked through the hallway, I felt something no mother wants to admit. I had been in the dark far longer than I thought. It wasn't the power in the house that had failed. It was the energy between us. And the painful truth is that many times we keep offering light to someone who no longer wants to see. If you're hearing this now, you might understand what I felt. Maybe you've held something that represented far more than it appeared. A note, a picture, a mug, a keepsake, or even a silence. And that's why I want you to tell me where you're listening from. Write in the comments your city, your state, your country. I'm asking because this story isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who has noticed the light inside her home fading without anyone having the courage to explain why. But that morning, as the sun finally tore through the sky, I understood that the forgotten object in the yard wasn't an accident. It was a warning. It was as if destiny were telling me that some truths arrive without asking permission, and ignoring them is the same as walking through the dark, pretending the road is still safe. And I knew, though I tried to deny it, that flashlight held more than dust and rust. It held the story of an abandonment I didn't want to acknowledge. As I stared at it, I felt a pain that didn't fit inside my chest, but also a strange strength, like something inside me was waking up after years asleep. And life is curious that way. Sometimes we only begin to see when we lose the light we thought we needed. Sometimes it's in the dark that we learn how to truly see. I stood there, in the middle of the kitchen, holding the flashlight, and realized that moment was the beginning of something I still couldn't name. It was as if that morning were saying, "Get ready. What comes next will show you who truly stands by your side and who never has." And then the memory of what happened the night before came back to me. A simple detail, almost insignificant, but one that would change everything. Because before the flashlight was forgotten, something deeper had already been abandoned. And I was finally ready to see what had always been right in front of me. That same morning, with the flashlight still in my hands, an old memory began to rise inside me, as if someone had turned on a light deep within my mind. Before any flashlight existed in that house, before he even learned to walk without tripping over the furniture, I was already the light guiding his every step. I was the first brightness he ever saw when the world still felt too big, too frightening, too confusing, and for a long time, I accepted that place without question. It was my duty, my role, the mission life handed me. I remember the nights when the whole street was dark, the neighborhood silent, and I was still awake, listening to his breathing. I remember the fevers in the middle of the night, the medicine measured just right, the silent prayers I whispered, asking God not to take from me the only thing that gave purpose to my journey. While so many slept peacefully, I was the guardian of the house. I was the mother who didn't allow her own light to fade. I was the flame that never took a day off. When he started growing up, that light shifted from physical care to emotional protection. It was with me he learned his first words. It was into my arms he ran when he fell and scraped his knee. When fear hit him, he didn't call out for anyone else. It was always, "Mom," and I answered, every single time, even tired, even sick, even exhausted. I answered. I got up. I fixed whatever needed fixing. It was as if the whole house revolved around my willingness to show up. And for most people, that seems normal. But only a mother who carries this weight knows the burden of being the only light shining in someone else's darkness. As time passed, I noticed he began to seek other lights out there. Friends, distractions, decisions. The world was calling him, and the house that once was his whole universe slowly became just the place he slept when he had nowhere else to be. I watched that change unfold right in front of me. But I kept turning on the living room light when he came home late. I kept leaving warm food on the stove, kept waiting for the sound of his key turning in the door, as if that sound alone proved I was still needed in some way. The truth is, I had always been the light of the house, the one who calmed storms, softened harsh words, held back my own to avoid hurting him, mediated arguments, and held him when the world rejected him. I made sure to illuminate everything, even what wasn't mine. I tried to brighten his mind when he chose paths I knew would bring him pain. I tried to brighten his heart when I saw he was being influenced by people who never carried anything for him. And still, I kept standing firm, like a candle willing to burn itself down just to keep someone else from stumbling. Maybe that's the mistake many mothers make, believing they were born to be an eternal light in the life of someone who, one day, will pretend they never needed them. Maybe that's why you're listening to this and recognizing yourself in every word. Maybe you were also the first to wake up and the last to lie down, the first to worry and the last to be remembered. If that's you, write this in the comments. I was too much light for someone who left me in the dark. That sentence isn't just mine. It belongs to all of us who carried a home on our backs and were still treated like a footnote in someone else's story. As I looked at that forgotten flashlight in the yard, I didn't see just an object covered in dew. I saw every moment when I lit my own soul so he wouldn't lose his way. I saw the events I missed, the dreams I postponed, the opportunities I rejected just to be home when he arrived. I saw the jobs I took out of necessity, even when they broke me, because the power bill couldn't be late, the fridge couldn't be empty, the school supplies had to be paid for. I had always been the one responsible for keeping the lights on, not just the electric ones. The light of dignity, the light of respect, the light of home. The flashlight he insisted on buying years later became almost a symbol of all of that. He showed up with it one day, excited, saying that if the power ever went out, we wouldn't need to worry. I smiled, but inside I thought, if only he knew how long I've been lighting everything alone, with no battery, no rest, no switch to turn off. Still, I embraced the gesture. I celebrated it, because in that moment, I wanted to believe he was sharing the responsibility of keeping our house illuminated. I wanted to believe he noticed what I did for us, but time revealed something different. The flashlight became a toy for quick visits to the backyard. Then it faded into some forgotten corner, just like so many other things he scattered around without caring enough to put away. And I, without noticing, kept doing what I always did, picking up after him, organizing, cleaning traces, fixing the mess, as if my mission had always been, endlessly, to erase everyone's carelessness while no one noticed the pieces of me breaking inside. Being the light of the house has a high price. No one asks if you're tired. No one asks who lights you. No one asks if your soul is in the dark too. No. They show up, flip a switch, eat, complain, leave. And the woman holding everything together remains there, gripping a responsibility she didn't choose alone, but embraced out of love. And it is that same love that, one day, begins to hurt. I know many listening to me now understand this kind of pain. The pain of being a comfort, a refuge, a shelter, yet suddenly being treated like a burden, like someone who expects too much. The pain of offering your arms for years and, when needing a shoulder, finding only cold answers, delayed messages, ignored calls. If you felt that, write in the comments, I know how this pain burns. It isn't drama. It isn't exaggeration. It is the truth of those who were light until they had nothing, left only to be surrounded by shadows. That morning, holding the flashlight, I understood that for a very long time, I had accepted being that silent lighthouse. I had learned to fix what broke, support what was abandoned, and hold together what everyone else let fall apart. Always in the name of peace, in the name of love, in the name of family. I was the kind of woman who would rather suffer than let others hurt. The kind of mother who swallowed her words so her son wouldn't feel guilt. The kind of matriarch who carried in her chest what she never found courage to say out loud, I need to be cared for too. And the hardest part to accept is that, at some point, that light stops being admired and starts being used. People grow so accustomed to your presence that they believe you can't burn out. They lean on your glow, but don't care about your exhaustion. And without meaning to, they begin treating you as something that will always be there, available, ready, accessible. Until one day, you realize you've been pushed to the corner of the yard, just like that flashlight, still working, still holding energy, but ignored, forgotten, disrespected. As those thoughts drifted through my mind, I ran my fingers over the flashlight's surface and felt, in a strange way, that the object was speaking to me, as if it carried a part of my story. The story of a woman who always illuminated but was never invited to sit at her own table of appreciation. The story of a mother who was shelter in childhood, shield in adolescence, support in adulthood, yet over time was pushed into the role of obligation instead of love. The light that had always been my responsibility had a name, a face, a smile, a history. It answered to my son. And as much as I wanted to deny it, I knew the time had come to look at this truth without turning away. That flashlight forgotten in the yard wasn't just carelessness. It was the perfect portrait of the place I had come to occupy in his life. And before that, night, when the house went dark, many other nights had already shown me that the light between us had been flickering for a long time. I just didn't want to admit it. Not yet. Sometimes we spend years trying to understand where love began to lose strength. But the truth is that distance never arrives suddenly. It comes in small, hesitant steps, but constant ones, until the day you realize the one who once ran into your arms can barely see you anymore. And when that happens, it doesn't take screaming, arguments, or disrespect to wound a mother. Silence is enough. Neglect is enough. A glance that no longer lingers on yours is enough. I started noticing that distance in the tiniest details of everyday life. The good morning that turned into a mumble, the hug that became a quick pat on the shoulder, the rush with which he walked out the door as if being home were just a pause between better plans. Nothing angry, nothing cruel, just small cuts wearing down the soul of someone who spent a lifetime giving her best. I told myself it was normal, that children grow, that life changes. But inside, I felt something deeper taking shape, something that left me uneasy, as if a shadow had settled between us. He came home late, ate quickly, went upstairs without asking how my day was. Sometimes he left his plate in the sink, as if it were my job to clear it. Other times he left lights on all over the house as if bills didn't matter. And I, out of habit or love, turned everything off. In silence, organized what he left, scattered, picked up what he dropped, as if I were always cleaning up after someone who no longer saw me as the woman who raised him, but as someone whose role was simply to make his life easier. One day, he walked past me in the hallway and barely lifted his eyes. Such a small gesture, so quick, but it cut me deeply. Not because of disrespect, but because of the lack of presence. That is how a mother's heart wears down. not through dramatic rejection, but through repeated indifference. I know many women listening right now understand that wound. The wound of being necessary, but not valued, remembered only when convenient. The last thought of someone who was once your entire world. And that's why I want those watching to write in the comments a phrase that holds too much truth to be ignored. I know what it feels like to be forgotten by someone I lit up. That phrase carries weight, carries history, carries truth. It isn't just mine. It belongs to so many women who gave everything and received so little in return. Women who held the world in their arms, yet when they needed an embrace, found only distance. His behavior kept changing, and each change seemed small enough that I almost convinced myself it wasn't worth feeling hurt. But it's the small things that pile up. It's the small indifferences that create chasms. He forgot important dates, ignored advice, brushed off my concern as exaggeration. There was no open cruelty, only growing. Coldness, a habit of placing me aside without even noticing, and the flashlight forgotten in the yard. That flashlight became the symbol of it all. More than just a dew-covered object, it became the physical proof that I had been pushed into second place. Not because he hated me, but because he no longer considered me important enough to deserve care. A mother knows when she stops being a priority, knows when she stops being remembered, knows when she becomes part of the furniture, present, but invisible. I remember one specific day when he rushed out, leaving behind a mess that took over half the living room. Clothes thrown around, an open backpack, papers everywhere. I stood there looking at everything, unsure if I was facing the physical mess or the emotional mess he had left inside me. And, as always, I cleaned, organized, folded, restored order. I placed my hand on the back of the chair and thought, when did I become just the person who fixes what he breaks? When did loving someone turn into picking up the pieces they don't care enough to notice? Mothers have a habit of justifying everything. We tell ourselves it's a phase, that he's tired, that work is too much, that stress is temporary. But deep down, there is a moment that hurts more than all the rest. The moment you realize your child has grown, yes, but grown without looking back. Grown without remembering what you carried. Grown without considering what you feel, without measuring the consequences of emotional neglect. That's not malice. It's ego. It's emotional immaturity. It's the illusion of independence that makes so many believe they no longer need anything from us. I tried to talk, tried to start conversations, tried to enter his world, but each attempt was met with short answers, shallow phrases, or that expression that says without speaking, "Not now, Mom." And I stepped back. I always stepped back, not out of fear, but out of love, because I never wanted to pressure him, never wanted to be a burden, never wanted to be an inconvenience. But constant retreat turns a mother into silence, and too much silence hurts. The flashlight stayed there, fallen in the yard, as if it were a mirror of the place I held in his life. And the more I looked at it, the more I understood. It wasn't about material neglect. It was about emotional neglect, about absence of consideration, about the light I offered my whole life and how he now treated it as disposable. The dead flashlight wasn't an accident. It was the perfect portrait of what our relationship had become. I know many listening now have felt that same soft but cutting wound, the wound of not being remembered, the wound of giving more than you receive, the wound of being light but never being seen. If you feel that too, right, I've been dimmed before. Because saying that doesn't reveal weakness, it reveals truth, it reveals humanity, it reveals the weight of loving someone who never learned how to love you back. And it was in this accumulation of small neglects, small absences, small gestures that hollowed me out, that I realized something inside me was changing too. Not anger, not resentment, but a quiet awakening, as if God were preparing my heart to understand what was coming. Because before the night the house lost power, before the blackout that changed everything, the real darkness had already settled into our relationship. I just didn't want to see it. Not yet. There was something inside me that insisted on believing a conversation could fix everything, that all we needed was to sit down, look into each other's eyes, and speak honestly. I tried so many times to find the right moment, that one instant when his heart might be open enough to listen, but that moment never came. There was always something in the way, a rush, an excuse, a polite deflection that pushed everything to later. And that later became a shadow haunting every attempt I made to bring us closer again. I remember calling him some nights when he seemed less tense, less tired, but as soon as I began to speak, he'd say he was busy, needed to rest, that it wasn't a good time. And I would retreat, the way so many mothers retreat so they won't be seen as a burden. Retreat, because rejection cuts deeper when it comes from someone who was carried inside your own body, someone who grew with your sweat, someone who once was your entire universe. His silence became sharper each day, and I learned to choose my words, carefully, like someone stepping on thin ice to avoid new cracks. On many days I began a sentence and stopped halfway, already anticipating his reaction. He always said, "We'll talk later," but that later never arrived, never formed, never took shape. It was like waiting for a door to open in a house where no one plans to return. I tried to understand, tried to rationalize, tried telling myself it was just a phase, just exhaustion, just distraction. But the truth is that the silence grew between us like a narrow hallway stretching farther with every failed attempt, and I walked through that hallway alone, searching for a door he had locked without realizing it. What hurt most wasn't the lack of conversation itself, it was the lack of space for us to exist together the way we once did. There was a time when he would sit beside me and talk about everything, small problems, fears, joys, even silly things. Today, he replied with one-word answers, as if every word weighed more than he wanted to carry. I tried sharing a light memory, talking about something he liked, but he would look at his phone, adjust his keys, sigh as if wishing the moment away. It's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it, but a child's indifference has a bitterness no other pain can reproduce. I know many who watch me understand this sensation, the feeling of speaking to someone you love and watching your words hit an invisible wall, the feeling of trying to build a bridge while the other side doesn't even notice the gap widening. That's why I ask those listening to write in the comments a phrase that captures this perfectly. I once waited for a conversation that never came. That's not just a sentence, it's a confession, a recognition of what so many mothers endure in silence. There were so many times when I rehearsed entire conversations before calling out to him. I'd think about what to say, how to say it, the right tone so he wouldn't misunderstand, so he wouldn't feel like I was charging him or demanding something too heavy for him to handle. And when I finally gathered the courage and knocked on his bedroom door, he would answer without even lifting his eyes from whatever he was doing. Sometimes he said he had a headache, other times he had an early appointment the next morning, or that he was talking to someone on the phone. And I stepped back. I always step back. Mothers do that. We do it because we learn that, to preserve the relationship, sometimes we have to swallow the pain and keep it inside our chest. But pain that gets buried for too long changes shape. It becomes silent resentment, a longing for something that never died, but no longer lives. It turns into constant observation of his gestures, trying to guess whether there is still space for you in his world. It becomes an internal battle between what you feel and what you've learned to accept. I would look at him and wonder how we reached this point without a single serious argument, without harsh words, without dramatic ruptures, just emotional neglect, lack of attention, and the slow erosion of affection that should have kept us close. There were so many moments when he walked past me in a hurry, and I thought that if he could just notice I was trying to talk, maybe everything would be different. But he seemed numb, as if my presence were nothing more than part of the background, just another fixture in the house. A mother who's there, but no longer has enough voice to influence his life. That's how I felt. Someone who speaks but isn't truly heard. Someone who tries but isn't really seen. Someone waiting for a response that never arrives. Little by little, I began to understand that the conversation I so desperately needed wasn't a priority for him. It wasn't important. It wasn't even relevant. He didn't notice the decline in our relationship because he wasn't the one walking in the dark. I was. It was my heart stumbling around looking for answers. It was my soul searching for light in a place where only shadows remained. With every failed attempt, I felt something inside me slipping away. My voice weakened, my chest tightened, silence took over. It's painful to admit, but there comes a moment when a mother realizes no conversation will ever come, because the other side has no willingness to build dialogue. And so I began to grow quiet without meaning to. I began stepping out of spaces that once belonged to me. I began accepting that the distance wasn't temporary. It was his new normal, and I had to understand where I fit in that landscape. The flashlight forgotten in the backyard hurt for that exact reason, because it became the perfect metaphor for the conversation that never happened. It represented everything left unsaid, everything that got trapped in my throat, everything I wished he could see, but never bothered to look at closely. The flashlight was there, fallen, ignored, unlit, and when I looked at it, I realized that's exactly how I felt standing in front of him, a light that once mattered, now left in the dark without a second thought. I know those listening to me understand this pain, this waiting, this emptiness that grows when the other person won't make space for you to speak. So if you've lived this, comment with honesty. I was once the silence in someone's life I loved. That sentence is the mirror of so many stories that look different on the outside, but carry the same wound. And as I held the flashlight and listened only to the sound of my own heartbeat, I understood that the silence between us hadn't appeared that morning. It had been built over years, in every later, in every avoided glance, in every rushed step down the hallway. It was a silence I didn't choose, but one I was forced to accept until the moment I sensed something was about to change. Because before the house went dark that night, before the blackout that would change everything, there was a deep pause, almost spiritual, when I felt something inside me preparing to finally face the truth I had avoided for far too long. That night started like so many others. The distant sound of cars on the street, the faint glow from the window, the clock marking hours that no longer meant anything to me. I was in the kitchen, trying to organize thoughts that scattered faster than anything on the table. Then the whole house sighed with a sharp click, and in an instant, everything fell into darkness. The blackness swallowed every corner, every wall, every memory, as if it wanted to show me a truth I refused to face. It wasn't just the electricity that had failed. It was the silent confirmation that I had been living for a long time in the emotional dusk of a son who once was my brightest light. I stood still for a few moments, feeling the weight of the darkness settle over me. No sound, no glow, no presence. And for the first time in a long time, the house reflected exactly how I felt inside. A dimmed space where every shadow revealed an old wound. I walked slowly, feeling the air with my hands, searching for something I already knew wasn't where it should be. The flashlight came immediately to mind, and the hit of that memory tightened my chest. There it was, outside, forgotten, the way I had been forgotten so many times. The only available light was exactly where it shouldn't be, left out in the yard as if it had no value. And that night, it was no coincidence. It was a symbol. I took a deep breath and moved through the hallway, hearing my steps echo like someone saying goodbye to old certainties. Every step revealed a truth I already knew, but didn't want to accept. The powerless house showed me, without mercy, the exact reflection of our relationship, a space where the light didn't come from within, but depended on something external. Depending on a light that isn't yours is living at the mercy of someone else's absence, and I finally understood that. I opened the back door slowly, feeling the cold night breeze touch my face. The sky was dark, without stars, as if even it had decided to remain silent. The flashlight lay there, on the ground, still damp from the previous dawn. Seeing it like that made me realize it wasn't just a forgotten tool. It was a living metaphor of how I was being treated. A light only sought when the darkness becomes unbearable. A useful light, but never cherished. A light discarded during the day and remembered only when there's no other option. And as painful as it was to admit, that was exactly how my son had been seeing me. I picked up the flashlight gently, as if gathering pieces of myself that had been left out in the cold. Feeling its weight brought back memories I wished I had forgotten. Memories of nights when he depended on me to face fears he no longer remembers having. Memories of moments when I was the only light he had, when the world seemed far too big for him. And now, alone in the dark yard, I realized that light still existed, but it was no longer enough to illuminate the path between us. As I walked back inside, carrying the flashlight like someone holding a bitter answer, the house felt bigger, emptier, quieter. The blackout revealed everything I didn't want to see. When I turned on the flashlight, a faint beam cut through the darkness, revealing familiar objects that suddenly looked different under that fragile light. It was as if I were seeing my own story reflected on the walls. For so many years, I lit everything by myself, and now I depended on a forgotten light just to avoid stumbling over my own steps. The weakness of that beam insisted on teaching me that trusting your clarity to someone else's hands is far too dangerous. Many listening to me now know exactly what this means. They know what it's like to be responsible for holding everything together, yet still be treated as if they were just an occasional support. So I want you to write in the comments a phrase that carries truth for so many. I once needed light when no one wanted to see me. That alone says everything about the loneliness so many women endure when relationships fade while they're still trying to shine. As I walked through the house with that fragile beam, I understood for the first time what it truly means to be in the dark. It isn't just the absence of brightness, it's the absence of company. It's the weight of emptiness. It's the silence that answers when you call and no one responds. The flashlight lit the path, but it couldn't fill the silence. And maybe that was the most revealing moment of that night, realizing that even with borrowed light, I was still alone. The house felt like it was breathing a quiet kind of grief, as if it too sensed something missing long ago. And as I walked slowly, each dark corner seemed to speak of the years I ignored in the name of peace. I stood there in the living room, the beam cutting through the air, and understood that night would stay with me forever. Not because the power went out, but because the truth came on. The truth that I was tired of waiting to be seen. Tired of being the light when no one cared to turn mine on. Tired of picking up what others dropped, fixing what others broke. Being the foundation of a home where I felt increasingly out of place. The flashlight trembled in my hands, as if trying to tell me that walking in the dark wasn't the problem. The real problem was walking in the dark while hoping someone would come to offer me light. That's when I felt something awakening, something without a name yet, but something that would change everything. And as I watched that fragile beam illuminating only a few steps ahead, I understood I could no longer depend on light that came from outside to keep moving forward. The night was just beginning, and I sensed something bigger approaching, something that would finally show me everything I had been avoiding for far too long. When I returned to the living room still holding the flashlight, it felt as if that small object carried more weight than my arms could truly bear. The weak beam flickered, warning that the battery was close to dying, but I already knew something inside it wanted to be seen. I sat down slowly, letting the silence of the house wrap around me like a cold blanket. It was strange how, even in the darkness, that flashlight seemed brighter than before, as if it carried a secret ready to be revealed after years of waiting. I ran my fingers over the top, remembering how, when he was little, he loved taking things apart just to see how they worked. Maybe that's why I felt an instinctive urge to open that flashlight, even without knowing what I'd find. The lid resisted a bit before loosening, as if it were protecting something too delicate to face the world. And when it finally opened, the flickering light revealed more than old wires and settled dust. There was a small piece of paper carefully folded, tucked between the parts as if it were part of the mechanism. My heart stopped for a second. It was impossible not to recognize that uneven fold, that childlike way of hiding something precious. I held the paper gently, afraid it might fall apart between my fingers. And as I unfolded it, I felt myself opening a part of my soul that had long been shut away. It was a drawing, simple, crooked, innocent. 2 stick figures representing the two of us. Him, small, standing beside me holding my hand. Above it, a childlike sentence written in clumsy handwriting. My mom is my light. I had to close my eyes because the memory hit me hard. I saw myself years ago holding that sentence inside my heart, believing nothing in the world could dim the love he felt for me. I remembered his smile when he handed me that paper, proud as if he had given me a treasure. And he had. Tears gathered, but I didn't let them fall, because in that moment, pain and tenderness blended in a way only mothers can understand. The boy who once saw me as light had grown up, pulled away, forgotten. But that drawing reminded me that he once loved me with the purest kind of love, a love that expected nothing in return, a love that didn't compare or question, a love that saw in me the safety of the entire world, I held that paper with the same care I once held him in his first steps. It felt as if time had folded back just to remind me that before all this distance, there had been a bond too strong to be erased by any recent shadows. The flashlight, the same flashlight he, left forgotten outside, had kept something he placed there himself. Maybe he did it as a child, imagining that little note could travel with the light and brighten the world. Maybe he hid it impulsively, affectionately, or simply believing it was a safe place for something that represented us. I'll never know. But in that moment, I realized life is full of painful ironies. The dead flashlight carried within it the brightest memory I could have found. As I traced the lines of the drawing with my fingers, each stroke felt like poetry written by time. The phrase, "My mom is my light," seemed to pulse on the paper, alive, speaking to me after years of silence. And something inside me shifted, a new understanding, deep, quiet, undeniable. He may have changed. He may have grown up and stopped looking back. He may have forgotten gestures that once defined him. But the love he felt in childhood was real. It was genuine. It was ours. And no distance, no indifference, no carelessness could erase that truth. The house remained dark, lit only by the weak glow of the flashlight, but inside me something began to brighten. Maybe I had spent too much time thinking only about the abandonment, only about the emptiness, only about what was missing. And there, in front of that drawing, I realized memory also holds light, ancient light, gentle light, light that survives even when every lamp goes out. I breathed deeply, feeling a mix of pain and gratitude. Pain for all that was lost, gratitude for all that had been. Motherhood is made of this: absences and presences, losses and rediscoveries, silences that hurt, and memories that heal. I looked at the paper again, trying to imagine what he would think if he knew it still existed. Maybe he wouldn't even remember. Maybe that moment had been far too small for him, but far too large for me. Mothers carry these things. Mothers keep what their children forget. Mothers remember what for them lasted only a second. And in that paper, in that uneven drawing, was a piece of my own story, a piece I needed to find again, to understand that even if he pulls away now, I cannot deny the love he once gave me with the purest heart. The flashlight trembled in my hand, as if telling me there was still more to see, more to understand, more to feel. But I stayed there, suspended in that memory, letting it rekindle a different kind of light, an inner light, a light that didn't depend on him, or the house, or anyone else, a light I needed to rediscover, the light that had been inside me since the first day I held him in my arms, the light he saw when he wrote that sentence that still echoed in my chest. If you've ever found a memory that broke you and rebuilt you at the same time, write in the comments, "I carry lights no one else remembers." That sentence is more than a symbol. It is truth for those who carry pieces of love that hold the soul together, even when the present feels unbearably heavy. And as I breathed deeply and folded the paper again, I felt something beginning to shift, something I still couldn't define, but something that promised to reveal much more than what was hidden inside that flashlight. There was a moment inside me I kept avoiding, like someone who turns away from a mirror showing more than they are ready to see. The open flashlight on the table, the childhood paper inside it, the trembling light, all of it seemed to call me toward a truth I always knew but never dared to say out loud. Because there is a type of pain that isn't born from fights or harsh words. It grows slowly, quietly, in the form of neglect, absence, indifference. And when this pain finally finds room to speak, it doesn't only wound the heart, it wounds the entire memory of the path we walked. I looked at the flashlight and repeated to myself what my heart had been shouting for years. No one abandons an object by accident. When someone forgets something that once mattered, it's because they forgot, long before, the person who gave that object its meaning. That sentence cut like a knife, but it also revealed the healing hidden behind the wound. The truth about abandonment isn't in the act itself, but in the story it exposes. That flashlight he left in the yard wasn't just a forgotten tool. It was the perfect reflection of the place I had come to occupy in his life. Something used, but not valued. Something helpful, but not honored. Something that, if it went dark, wouldn't make a difference. And this realization cut through me in a way only someone who has been dimmed by a person they once loved deeply can understand. Many women listening to me now know exactly how cruel it is to realize love doesn't disappear all at once. It drains slowly, without warning, until silence fills everything. As I looked at that folded paper, I realized it was proof that love once existed. It existed purely, strongly, brightly, and because of that, the abandonment hurt even more. Distance never hurts when it comes from someone who meant nothing. It hurts when it comes from someone who once meant everything. I took a deep breath, trying not to drown in that weight, and felt something inside me start to reorder itself. It was as if my heart whispered, "You cannot keep living dimmed, waiting for someone to remember to turn you on." And this truth didn't come to destroy what remained. It came to show me what still needed rebuilding inside myself. For years, I walked believing the darkness between us was temporary, that all it needed was patience, that love was enough. But that night, holding the flashlight and the drawing, I understood that abandonment is a slow process, and that often we are the ones who let ourselves fade, trying to keep lit a flame the other person no longer protects. The truth about abandonment isn't only in the final act of being left behind, it's in what we accepted as normal long before that. And how many times did I accept crumbs of affection as if they were a feast? How many times did I swallow words to avoid conflict? How many times did I tolerate being last in line because I believed that eventually he would return to being that little boy who held my hand? Maybe you listening to me now have been through something similar. Maybe you allowed someone to dim your light slowly, without realizing that the missing brightness wasn't a lack of your love, but a lack of their care. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "I was light in a place that never saw me." That sentence isn't just a confession. It's acknowledgement of strength. It's admitting that even when others dim you, you still carry within you the ability to shine, and no one can take that away. As thoughts like these crossed my mind, I realized I was standing before a choice I had never been able to see clearly before. I could keep waiting for him to come back, to look over his shoulder, to notice how tired I was, but waiting for someone who can't see our pain is choosing to remain in the dark. And that night, with the flashlight trembling between my fingers, I understood that the decision to reignite my own light no longer depended on him. It depended on me. It was no longer about him seeing me. It was about me finally seeing myself. The flashlight became the perfect symbol of that realization. It only shined again because I opened it, because I touched it, because I paid attention to what had gone dark. And my life was the same way. I needed to open what I had kept closed inside me. I needed to touch the pain I kept avoiding. I needed to look straight at the abandonment I pretended not to see. And in that quiet movement, I discovered something that would change everything from that moment on. The light I had been searching for wasn't in him. It was in me. It always had been. That childhood sentence, "My mom is my light," echoed in my mind again. But this time it didn't hurt. This time it lit something inside me. Because I finally understood that I never stopped being a light. I simply let myself believe that I needed someone else's recognition to keep shining. The truth about abandonment isn't losing someone else. It's losing yourself while trying to hold on to something that can no longer support you. And I couldn't allow that anymore. I felt the air in the room shift, as if the whole house were witnessing that quiet awakening. It wasn't anger. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't distance. It was clarity. I was no longer willing to survive inside shadows that weren't mine. I was no longer willing to wait for conversations that never came. I was no longer willing to beg for affection where only silence lived. It was time to reignite the light I had allowed to weaken. If you've ever felt this moment of awakening, this moment when you finally understand that change begins inside you, write in the comments, "I choose to light my own way." That sentence marks the turning point so many women need to recognize inside their own stories. And as I folded the paper again and held the flashlight against my chest, I realized that night wasn't an ordinary night. It was the beginning of something, the beginning of a new way of seeing, feeling, existing. Something I still couldn't name, but something approaching like a revelation that would change everything from that point forward. After that night, something inside me changed in a way I couldn't explain right away. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a dramatic break. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was silent, deep, almost invisible to anyone on the outside, but devastating and liberating for anyone who feels it on the inside. It was as if, by opening that flashlight and finding the love hidden inside it, I had opened a forgotten door within myself, a door that led back to the woman I was before I became a mother, the woman who had dreams, who had her own shine, who had a life beyond responsibility, the woman who slowly dimmed herself to hold up someone else's world, and for the first time in a long time, I could see that woman clearly. The house still held traces of the darkness from the night before, but inside me a small light began to grow, a timid, fragile light, but entirely mine. I sensed it in the smallest things, in the way I breathed when I woke up the next morning, in the way I looked at the old flashlight still open on the table, in the way I realized I no longer needed to chase answers he wasn't willing to give. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for him to come to me. I was walking toward myself, and that shift, as small as it seemed, was the greatest emotional turning point of my life. I decided I needed a symbol, something to represent this quiet rebirth growing inside me. I thought of the old flashlight, the weight it carried, the buried memory hidden within it, and I realized that although that object mattered, it also held a kind of pain I no longer wanted to feed. I needed a new light, a light that wasn't memory, wasn't hurt, wasn't the past, a light I chose for myself, for my own path. So the next day, I left the house and bought a new flashlight. Simple, discreet, lightweight, but with a strength I hadn't seen in a long time. Maybe because now, when I looked at something that gave light, I saw more than usefulness. I saw meaning. When I held that new flashlight in my hands, I felt a different kind of peace. It was as if buying that light meant choosing myself for the first time in years. It wasn't about replacing something he let break. It was about reigniting something I had let go, dim inside me. A mother can love deeply, but that doesn't mean she must live in the shadow of someone else's absence. I realized that being a light doesn't mean illuminating someone else's life at the cost of your own. Being a light means having your own brightness, even when no one notices, even when no one thanks you, even when no one comes back to check if you're still there. I also understood that much of my pain came from expectation. Expecting to be seen, recognized, valued, expecting him to look at me the way he did when he was a child, expecting the adult he became to have the same sensitivity the child once had. And expectations are sharp blades. The tighter we grip them, the deeper they cut. I needed to let go, not out of resignation, but out of self-love, emotional maturity, wisdom. Letting go didn't mean stopping loving him. It meant stopping the kind of attachment that only wounded me. That new flashlight lit my bedroom that night in a way I hadn't felt in years. A clear, steady, unwavering light. A light that didn't flicker, didn't weaken, didn't rely on memories to exist. A light that stayed bright because I chose it, because I recharged it, because I decided I deserved to see my own path clearly. And when the light touched the mirror, I saw myself differently. Not as the mother who'd been forgotten, not as the woman abandoned emotionally, not as the dim reflection I'd carried. For years, I saw a woman rediscovering herself, a woman who still had life pulsing inside her, a woman taking back ownership of her own light. As I watched that gentle brightness spreading across my walls, I felt an unexpected gratitude. Gratitude for surviving the emotional blackout. Gratitude for finding strength inside my own darkness. Gratitude for understanding I no longer had to beg for scraps of attention. Because there are moments in life when we realize that the love we gave wasn't wasted, but it wasn't enough to keep reciprocity alive. And it's in those moments that the strongest women are born. Women who learn to walk without depending on someone else's light. Women who discover that when no one turns the lamp on for them, it's because God wants them to learn how to turn on their own. I know many listening right now have lived through this quiet turning point, that moment when pain gets tired of hurting and makes room for a calm but powerful strength. If you've lived this, write in the comments, I rose again from my own darkness. That sentence carries the truth of so many women who rebuilt their souls after being dimmed by the ones they loved most. Women who found light where no one expected. Women who stopped begging for affection and learned to give love to themselves. And that practice, simple as it may seem, is the greatest healing act there is. As I held my new flashlight, I realized it wasn't just an object. It was a commitment to myself, a daily reminder that I don't need recognition, explanations, apologies, or repair to keep living. The light I needed wasn't in my son. It wasn't in the past. It wasn't in his silence. The light was in me. It always had been. I had just forgotten. And that's what pain does sometimes. It dims, confuses, silences. But when we choose to reignite ourselves, no darkness can stop it. The new flashlight lit my path, but the real light, the one that mattered, was coming back alive inside me in a way I hadn't felt since the simplest days of my youth. And even knowing the journey was far from over, I realized that this was the first real step, the step of letting the past rest, the step of no longer depending on someone else's validation, the step of finally understanding that self-love isn't selfishness, it's survival. I lay down that night with the flashlight glowing beside me, and it felt like a new chapter was beginning. Not because someone decided to see me, but because I had finally decided to see myself. There are pains that teach us to rise. There are silences that force us to hear what we've been ignoring. And there are nights, like the one when the house lost power, that reveal more than they hide, because it was there, in the middle of the darkness, holding a forgotten flashlight and a piece of paper that carried the pure love of a child, that I understood something life had been trying to tell me all along. True light doesn't come from others. It doesn't come from objects. It doesn't come from children. True light is born from the woman who learns to love herself, respect herself, and illuminate herself from within. And when that light awakens, nothing can extinguish it. Not abandonment, not distance, not silence. The flashlight that once represented the weight of my loneliness now symbolizes the freedom I found within myself. It's no longer the portrait of someone who left me in the dark. It's the reflection of the woman I became when I realized that God always shows us where the switch is, even when the whole world tries to turn off the lights around us. If any part of this story touched your heart, write in the comments, "My light is mine." That sentence isn't a response. It's a commitment, a reminder of the worth every woman carries, even when the world tries to dim her shine. Now, before you leave this video, there's something I need to tell you. There is another video here on the channel waiting for you. Another story, another soul, another truth, revealed with the same depth and honesty you found here. It's not a continuation of this story, but it is another chapter in the world of the matriarch's secrets, where each narrative illuminates a different part of the feminine journey. Tap the video that's appearing on your screen. Your soul will recognize the light waiting for you there too.